What's up, everybody? So we are back for episode 2. The first episode I spoke about, I was trying to speak to the people that are starting their martial arts journey. And this time, we're going to do a little bit different here. We're going to talk to those people that have been in the game for a little bit, or maybe not. Maybe you are searching to challenge yourself even as a white belt. But these principles they're gonna stand for everybody, white through black belt, right? And it doesn't matter whether or not you are, searching to challenge yourself in jiu-jitsu or whatever martial art it may be. But today's topic, we're going to carry on the conversation. I think we ended off a little bit talking about competition, because I personally feel like competition is very important. And I find from, I've been competing in martial arts my whole life and have competed under multiple martial arts and multiple rule sets. So, I was hoping to maybe share some of the competitive history of martial arts, such as where it came from and how it all started, and then lead up to multiple facets of martial arts training for competition in particular. So if you're a competitor out there, this episode is for you. So the first thing we're going to do here is really just take a look at an excerpt from a video here. And I'm going to, what this will help, this will set us up for the conversation to come. And a lot of people don't really know about where martial arts competition started. I had brought up Bodhidharma in the last episode, right? Because he was the one that introduced martial arts training to the Shaolin monks, right? And brought about the principles of Buddhism, and really wanted these monks not just to be on the spiritual path, so to speak, but also using martial arts for that path, but also to protect others and around them. So there was a lot of weapons training. Kung Fu was invented, Wushu, and it's quite interesting stuff. So I'm going to read you guys a little excerpt from a video, right? So this is in the year 500, right? And if you guys want to look for this video, it's by Alatra TV. It's called Two Paths. But in the year 500, Bodhidharma set up the first competitions of martial arts, right? These were the famous Bodhidharma competitions. And the best of fighters took part in these competitions. And of course, Bodhidharma won the first competition, right? Which is kind of funny, right? The very person that puts on the competition is winning it. But really, these competitions, they would take place every 5 years. So 5 years later, he held the second competition. And this is the way it is continued to this day. Every 5 years, there was and still is a competition between masters, a real masters of hand-to-hand combat. So not only monks from Shaolin and other monasteries participated there, but clan schools also sent their representatives and hold competitions amongst themselves, right? A lot like what we do today in the jiu-jitsu scene, right? There are, people that come from all different schools, and they represent their school, and, they exchange, battles with each other here. So according to Bodhidharma, competitions are good because they make people more conscientious and serious about their physical training. So think about this, guys, right? You have a plan to compete in martial arts, and when you go onto a website and this martial arts circuit, this competition circuit website, and you purchase your entry for the competition, you guys will notice a certain sensation arise in you, right? Why? Because you've committed, right, to the act of partaking in this particular competition. And all of a sudden, there could be a multitude of sensations that run through you depending on who you are. It's different for everybody, but typically when you go to the mat, you tend to take your training more seriously, right? So that's why Bodhidharma believed it was important, right? So you become more conscientious about your training schedule, right? So that's the reason why Bodhidharma introduced this competition. So in the year 505, Bodhidharma also took part in the competition and won, of course, and people were outraged, right? It's understandable that when Bodhidharma won the first time and the second time, people thought it was unfair. So Bodhidharma established a rule that if a person wins twice in these competitions, he has no right to take part in any more competitions, right? And it's been like that ever since. And the most remarkable thing is, after Bodhidharma, there have only been 2 people in 1,500 years who managed to repeat what he did by winning these competitions twice. And we will get to the nature of this, the difference in this competition as opposed to what we see nowadays, right? So what's my point? It seems that martial arts masters actually hold competitions where there are no rules. There's one rule. Whoever comes out should win, and that's it. Just like in life, if you are facing a criminal, you don't negotiate with him about rules and everything else. The strongest survives, meaning everything is for real. And the remarkable thing is that these competitions don't last rounds or minutes. As a rule, they are over literally within seconds. Why? Because it is masters who are facing off, and they seem to be the best masters in the world. But now, let's look at this from a slightly different perspective. Let's say if those champions who win the competition established by Bodhidharma came out, for example, in MMA or boxing, what would happen? I'll tell you. They would lose almost instantly. Why? Because they wouldn't know what to do. It's funny, but it's true. They seem to be masters of such a high level. A person has devoted his whole life to martial arts. How can he lose in MMA? Easily, because he would go out there and feel absolutely restrained. Why? There are rules and restrictions there. That's the answer. Another example is a world boxing champion, for instance. In the previous video, we mentioned Mike Tyson and Muhammad Ali. Could any of them win competition, the competition established by Bodhidharma? I will answer, no. They would lose in the first second. Why? Because they have nothing to counter those masters. So you see, everything is relative in this world. There are certain rules, and those rules create limitations or give advantages. So if you guys think about this from a jiu-jitsu perspective, right, we see so many different rule sets out there. So let's take, for example, like IBJJF, right, where the points system is, really pushed. And then all of a sudden, what happened was the IBJJF added a rule set. And this was that heel hooks became allowed, right? Footlocks, certain footlocks that weren't allowed for so long, all of a sudden became adopted in the black belt divisions. And you saw people from that were playing in rule sets where those footlocks were more prominent, and they would come in and they would just destroy people, right? Even though both people are practicing the same art, when the intention changes based off the rule set, and that those that were training in their everyday life under the IBJJF rule set, and those that were training under a less limited rule set actually became ones that had more advantage because they were able to explore realms of possibilities that maybe people under that IBJJF rule set were not allowed to. So it's quite interesting, right? Where, let's take, for example, an MMA fight. It's not uncommon in traditional martial arts setting to attack the weakest points on somebody's body. So you find yourself in a clinch, and if someone can stick their thumb straight into your eyeball, all of a sudden that clinch changes, right? Just like when we talk about in BJJ, right? If you're a jiu-jitsu practitioner and you all of a sudden incorporate ground and pound, such as Eddie Bravo bringing in combat jiu-jitsu with open palm strikes, the jiu-jitsu changes immediately because it's no longer suitable as well for the rule set. So when you add these more and more techniques that are allowed within these rule sets, the game changes more and more and more, right? And that is exactly the reason why a lot of these matches did not last very long, right? Because you were allowed to do so many different things that were detrimental to your opponent's health that it would end the fight very, very quickly. Let's say in MMA, right? This 12 to 6 o'clock elbow that is not allowed, right? Imagine someone tried to tackle you, and rather than having to sprawl, you just had to drop an elbow on the back of their atlas, right? This would drop someone immediately and possibly, fatally injure them. So because that's not allowed, the game gets played a little bit longer, right? You're limited in what you can do. So it truly creates more of a sport atmosphere where the match can keep going and become more entertaining, right? Or let's take, for example, the ADCC rule set, okay? We see a lot of people that have been practicing jiu-jitsu for a long time, right? And this, you could even go back in the day and see how this is kind of transformed, because over the years, where you saw a lot of guard playing, now as the ADCC rule set has evolved, you see athletes adjusting their training in their everyday life. So now it's kind of become this form of submission wrestling, where wrestling has become of a much, much higher value because of the rule set of ADCC, right? So it's quite interesting, right? So really, this kind of sets us up for our future conversation here. So if you're new to jiu-jitsu, right? Let's say you're a white belt and you're looking to compete. One of the things that you will find, and it becomes a little bit more prevalent if you have someone that can dissect this experience for you, rather than you have to live through it over and over and over again before you start to figure it out. You can have someone dissect this experience and actually jump you ahead by, many competitions if you can heed their words and adapt to this. So I'm going to do this for you guys right now. What is this process that can actually accelerate our chances of doing well in competition? Well, as a white belt, where you don't know as many techniques and you're not used to competing under certain circumstances, you guys will find the fight or flight response be extremely dramatic, right? Meaning all technique kind of goes out the window and people aren't calm. They are filled with fear and anxiety and urgency to move and attack. And you can make this observation very easily just by going to a competition, watching a white belt division, right? And then, watching blue, purple, brown, right? And kind of see how the pace changes, how the cleanliness of the exchange of techniques changes. You can even just simply look at the facial expressions of those athletes as they compete. And you'll find, it's rare that you see someone at the white blue belt level that is very straight faced and is calm and focused on performing what it is that they need to do. They're viewing this as the most efficient way of exchanging or executing techniques, as opposed to fighting someone, right? So it's a very different perspective. And because white belts don't have as much control over one another, it almost reminds me of like how you would see on cartoons, like two cats that are fighting each other and they turn into like this ball of smoke. And there's like, you can't see anything that's going on. And it just kind of like looks like one giant animated, just a shit show, honestly. So really, our goal as a white belt, entering into a competition, in my opinion, is to understand this working mechanism within you, the mechanism that jumps into this fight or flight mode. How you all of a sudden you realize you have to go to the bathroom 20 times before your match, or you have those butterflies in your stomach, or you start sweating very easily, or your shoulders hike and you start to tense your body. Your breathing becomes extremely shallow, especially within the fight. Your adrenaline goes through the roof, and you feel like 2 minutes of fighting feels like an hour of fighting, right? So the reservation of energy and how to direct that energy outwardly is really important. And this just comes down to efficiency and learning how to decompress your nervous system, how to relax and really tune yourself to perform more efficiently. And this is really a thought process and a way of even stepping outside of your thoughts and realizing that your physiological response is a response to what is going on inside of your head, right? So some people, they like to really amp themselves up, right? So they want to they'll drink some energy drinks and slap themselves in the face. They get their heart rate going. They get like super amped to really and don't get me wrong. I think that some people, they have this strategy, they have this ritual, or they have this, something they do on a consistent basis, and it works for them. But why does it work for them, right? If we jump into placebo and nocebo effects, right? Say, for example, if you're a competitor and you wear the same gi every time you compete, right? Or you're going to wear a specific outfit that makes you look and feel good. Or, maybe you have a specific exercise routine that you do in the beginning, right? And what we do is we hold on to these things, and those known routines give us this placebo effect, because we tell ourselves, no, when I wear this outfit, if I look good, I perform good, right? I can play the part. Or if I do this exercise routine, I feel good and this will make me perform better. Or I have this sort of drink every single time, or I eat this food every single time, right? We create these rituals of known actions, and it helps us cope with the experience or prepare for the experience. And it actually builds confidence in our ability to perform. So we return back to these things over and over and over again. And what this does is it creates the placebo effect that I will do better, right? But it's because you have this genuine belief that you will do better, that you do better, right? And I'm not saying it will make you win, right? but your confidence in your performance goes up, right? Now, what is really most important here in terms of what actually works? Because placebo in its own will not bring us to victory, right? Self-belief will not be the only thing that brings us to victory, right? And now we're getting a little bit more into, these more advanced stages of competing. And this is really practical preparation, right? The discipline that we need to build within the training room, the intensity levels being monitored, the investment of attention on specific techniques according to the rule set needs to be monitored, right? And we can't necessarily rely too much on another person to do these things for us, because it's our actions alone that is responsible for this result. Does it help to have an instructor that understands these processes and implores you to follow them, or provides the environment for you to follow them, right? So I'm not saying it's on you alone, right? Because being part of a team that wants to invest their attention in your results, meaning they provide you the atmosphere and the attention and the instruction to understand, like, okay, this will be an ADCC rule set. We're going to be wrestling in the beginning of class leading up to, right? Or this is a points rule set where, domination of position might be a little bit more important. Not that it's not important in other rule sets, but you get my point. So, maybe you're instructed to slow down, hold these positions, keep this control, right? If they recover, pass again and hold. Rack up those points and build the confidence mid-match so that you can start flying, or not flying, but really gunning for submissions without the fear of getting swept because you're up on points. So an instructor that understands these strategies and implements them into the training room, or if it's not for everyone as a whole, they speak to you about them as an individual and can guide you through this process versus this cookie cutter black and white format that happens every time, regardless of what's going on, because, let's just say it's easy to do the same thing over and over again and not put the mental energy into exploring different methodologies of training, right? And I will do a future episode on the 3 archetypes that I use to help people identify methodologies of training, which are the artist, the athlete, and the engineer. Because there are certain qualities of jiu-jitsu that truly benefit a person. And when you break it down in a specific way and can pinpoint styles of training, it gives a little bit more of a holistic picture on how you should be training any martial art. By focusing on these different qualities of training. So let's get back to the training room here. So a common theme that we see nowadays, and you can find this different methodologies of training that tend to differ drastically, and I think culture has a lot to do with this, right? So, you can enter a gym where people are just simply bouncing off the walls and going ape shit every single class, right? It's just like as hard, as fast, as explosive, get as tired as you can sort of training. If you're not hurt, you're not working hard enough sort of mentality, right? But if you think in terms of like traditional Muay Thai kickboxers, and you understand and you see their methodology of training, those dudes can have like 300 fights in their career, and not walk around with any injuries, right? And in that sort of training room, hard sparring, not that it doesn't get done, but it gets done in a very methodical way, right? Whereas drilling might be done a little bit more explosive, more real time, but with lots of padding on, and it's like organized approach. And bag work, right, is done for cardio, and done to, obviously fine-tune technique. So how can we relate this to maybe a jiu-jitsu room? And this comes down to these three archetypes that I was talking about, because there's a time and there's a place, and maybe I'll just, cover them a little bit here rather than dedicate a whole separate episode to them, because they apply to this topic quite well. So why not? So in terms of the athlete, right, that might be what I was just explaining. You need to pick up the intensity, right? You need to make sure your body is in physical shape so that it doesn't fall apart, right? You need to know when to turn up the heat and use your athleticism. And that may not mean, you need to be, Usain Bolt. It doesn't mean you need to be this insane athlete. It just means you need to direct your attention and know when you need to scramble, know when you need to turn up the heat and the pressure and keep moving your body, and know when you need to hold and maintain position. So as I mentioned before, in competition, right, you'll see like silly things. Dudes will pass the guard, hardly pin someone on their shoulders, and just like try and jump their way right into a position or a submission, and they lose everything and there's a big scramble. Meanwhile, had they just known this concept of, okay, I passed, I can control, I can take a breath, make sure the shoulders are pinned before I look for my attack or something along those lines, they can conserve a lot of energy. So the athlete really understands this process, right? If you're a long distance runner, that doesn't mean you sprint the whole time, right? If you're a sprinter, it doesn't mean you rest. It's a full sprint, hard as you can, right? So based off the circumstances will determine your conservation of energy, right? Now, in terms of the engineer or technician, this really is the most important thing in jiu-jitsu. This is where you're going to get taken the furthest, and that is simply your investment of attention on technique and what makes techniques work. You need to constantly be asking the question, why? So when you're in competition and you don't maybe have the energy that you need, or you want to finish a match as fast as possible, you can't be cranking shit for no reason, right? There always needs to be this why. And this really should change, which I mentioned in the last episode, the intention. Why am I here? What technique am I truly working on and trying to master? So when you enter that competition and you have this toolbox filled with submissions or filled with, let's call them knives that are very sharp, right? Versus going in with a bunch of dull blades, you will find yourself having to exert a massive amount of energy in comparison to had you had those sharp knives, right? Cut a tomato with an extremely dull knife and you get a mess, right? So this is truly what the technician is all about, right? What techniques am I working on? Is it front headlock, right? Is it arming guillotines, anacondas, right? Darce chokes, things of that nature? Or is it to play guard and understand the principles of kazushi or knocking someone off balance? And you have this concept of like, okay, I can wrestle up here and I can entangle legs here, but what makes this entanglement lead to a wrestle up or a back take or a foot lock? And truly becoming extremely familiar with the blueprints within that designated space or technique, right? Meaning you have options A, B, and C. And not only that you create this map of positions within this space, but you ask deep questions or just ask why I do it like this. Is there another way to do it? And obviously, this takes an extreme amount of inquiry, right? And this is where a lot of people suffer in terms of their progression, right? Because people just want to roll, right? They just want to come in and they want to roll. They want to just move their body, right? Slowing down and taking the mental energy to observe and ask questions is something that people simply don't want to do, right? And if you learn how to do this at an early stage as a white belt, right, and you truly fall in love with the process of asking why, your competition experience will run far smoother, because then you can reflect on your matches, especially if you film them, and say, okay, why did I fall into this position? Why did I get my guard passed? What fundamental principles of the knee-elbow connection or framing in a right way, moving my hips, that I wasn't able to perform, right? So when you have this reflective experience consistently throughout your training, your technique gets far better, much faster, and you'll be much more efficient in the competition scene, right? And then the last one here, guys, is the artist, right? And this one's really important. And I find that, there's a lot of athletes and there's a lot of artists, right? And there's few people that are out there that are really like wizards at the technique portion. And what is the artist really good at? Because we have to consider that things don't always go according to plan. So there's a blueprint. And that blueprint sometimes falls apart because your opponent does something mid-match and it doesn't really set you up for what you had imagined it falling out to be, right? So recently, I was coaching a student of mine at an amateur MMA fight, right? And the plan was completely opposite of what we had expected, right? And it took 2 rounds for him to see that it wasn't going according to the blueprint. He was able to, and granted, this is a little fight IQ here too, but creativity is important when it comes to switching the game plan and moving with what you might feel like is a more intuitive approach, right? So sometimes we have this logical way of thinking our techniques through, but feeling overthought is a way for us to get into the deeper processes of performing techniques, because in a match, you don't have time to sit there and think. Your body just needs to react, and you may need to become a little bit more creative and express different techniques in ways that you actually maybe never trained for, right? So sometimes when you get stuck on this plan, right, you want to enter into the competition and do close guard arm bars, right? But the person keeps standing up out of your close guard and the technique's not working. You can't have tunnel vision and just try the same thing over and over and over again. And that happens to the best of us because we truly want, we're comfortable within those positions, but it doesn't seem to work out, right? And we spoke about leaving these positions of where we're most comfortable in the last podcast, and how that truly is where a lot of our growth lies. And, sometimes it takes that creativity and taking a chance on yourself and trusting your abilities in positions that maybe you had not planned on using, right? So I know it's a little bit more advanced concepts here, guys, and you might have to have some experience within competition to resonate with what I'm saying. But there's a lot of things to be, said about martial arts competition. But we wouldn't be here to this day competing had it not been for, Bodhidharma and creating this concept of really trying to get people to be more conscientious of their training, right? And the last thing I'll talk about here, guys, is your approach to competition in the training room, right? And I know that we spoke about rule set and practicing under a certain rule set, but this is more so about you preserving yourself for the long game, right? If you're tearing your ACL every 8 months, right, you might want to reevaluate what you're doing. If you're walking around with chronic back pain all the time, you might want to reevaluate with what you're doing, right? And we can go back to the analogy of these dull swords because the body is falling apart. The blade isn't sharp. It can't execute its goal because it's in too much pain or it's limited in its movement capabilities. So making sure that you have a balanced training routine, making sure you understand what sort of diet works well for you. And there's this concept of biochemical individuality. I forget the author of the book, but he goes into a human's natural, based off DNA and ancestry, how, when you grow up, let's say in Northern Europe, you're not going to find much fruit in Northern Europe. You're not going to find much vegetables where it's cold all the time, right? The terrain is not suitable. So there's a lot of, animal products. And if you come from a long line of Norse ancestors, it is, and you're eating fish and cabbage, it might not work. Oh, well, maybe not fish, but let's say like, tropical fruits and salads might not be the best of things. But, people always want to take the diet approach as some cookie cutter thing, like, oh, just have this much calories, this much fat. Like they worry about the micros and macros and just, think that if those numbers meet the standard, that the quality of food doesn't matter. And they find themselves like gorging on garbage filled with chemicals and whatnot. And again, is that sharpening your blade or is it dulling your blade, right? So in order to have a sustainable routine, you have to manage your time efficiently, meaning how many times a week are you training, right? Are you leaving yourself room for recovery, saunas, ice baths, proper exercise routine, right? Proper sleep. And this seems to be a big thing that especially you young guys out there don't quite understand yet because you're young and it doesn't reflect your everyday experience, but it will. Right? As the body gets older, it's going to require certain things, right? Meaning recovery is super important. Recovery is actually part of your training routine. What sort of exercises do you need, right? Because you may find these little nagging injuries take constant rehabilitation as you're training jiu-jitsu or training martial arts. So are you staying on top of those things? And as well as that, are you bringing yourself in a positive direction with muscle endurance and your cardio and just keeping everything tuned and feeling good, right? And sometimes the best thing for your training routine is to take a week off, take 2 weeks off, take a month off, right? And that seems so ass backwards for a lot of people, but when the body reaches a certain point, sometimes that's important to do. So these are a lot of things that you guys can consider in terms of competition, in terms of keeping your blade sharp, in terms of keeping your mind present, understanding that physiological response to the thoughts inside your head, and how those will be, certainly a big contributor to how you are competing, right? That placebo and nocebo effect. If you know you haven't been training hard, do you think within your subconscious you're going to be confident? Do you think that, and that's the funny thing, guys, is I've seen so many times people do absolutely no training. They get injured, they disappear, their priorities change, but they're so desperate to be seen on Instagram as one person or another, and they want to be this jiu-jitsu competitor or MMA fighter or whatever it may be, but their actions don't represent the character or the words that they are playing. So my point here is you may think you're fooling other people, but you're really fooling yourself, right? Because your actions don't represent your goals, right? And that's really what it comes down to. And if you can do that on a more consistent basis, the proof is in the pudding, and you won't be lying to yourself. And that, through the discipline and the training routine, right? You'll understand that you're ready, that you've done the work, you've done the homework to get yourself where you need to be, right? And ultimately, guys, discipline is at the forefront of this. Understanding how your thoughts are reflected in your words, and how your words, right, should lead to the deeds that bring us closer to our goal, right? And martial arts training, guys, is one of the best disciplines for us to be able to do this. So essentially, your competition, guys, does not have to be this make or break on your character. But what it should be is just another tool in your toolbox to develop this skill, to get you closer to your goal of being the best version of yourself. And if that becomes the goal, then all the bullshit motivations that actually don't mean anything, you don't put your investment of attention on them. And when your investment of attention is simply on you being the best you, versus being this or being that, or accomplishing this or accomplishing that, you will, as a byproduct, achieve the goals that you want, right? And that's it, guys. That's it for today. Hopefully, this advice on competition helped you guys, okay? As I mentioned earlier, I'll be doing these as much as I can. I may disappear for a few days. I may disappear for a week. But again, the investment of attention, right, is what's important. So I'll try and keep these going. And again, feel free to comment. What you like, what you don't like. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you have any questions? And if you post them on the comments below, I will certainly answer them in future episodes. Okay? Thanks for joining me. See you next time.